Hi everybody, we're live. I'm watching the participant count go up, so what I'm just going to do is wait a little while for that to level off before we kick off. Thanks for joining us bright and early on a Tuesday morning. Okay, right, I think I'll launch into my intro. Good morning everyone, and thanks so much for joining this More Films for Freedom webinar. I'm Jess Loveland, I'm the head of the BFI Network, which is the BFI's programme of funding and professional development support for new and emerging writers, directors and producers. Our remit is to support exciting new voices and progressive projects and ideas, and we're absolutely delighted to be working with our partners at British Council again to support a second round of the brilliant More Films for Freedom initiative. Over the next hour or so, we'll give you an overview of the More Films for Freedom programme, and you'll get a chance to meet the team behind one of the films made through the programme last year. Then we're going to go on to talk a bit about how to apply for More Films Round 2 ahead of the application deadline, which is coming up fast. It's on the 16th of August. If you haven't joined us for one of these online events before, I'll just point out a few things that can make the experience a little bit more interactive for you. On your screen, you'll see there's a chat box where you can chat to one another. If you're going to chat in there, please be sure to set your settings to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your comments, not just the panelists. There's also a Q&A box where you can type questions that you'd like to ask our panelists, so please do feel free to fully engage there. There's also an option to keep questions anonymous if you prefer that. I'm going to be available in the chat box to talk to people if you have any questions that you'd like to ask me. I'm also going to be dropping links in there to maybe the application form, the guidelines, anything that comes up over the course of the conversation. I'll try and be quick and drop the links in there. So now I'd just like to hand over to the wonderful Briony Hanson, who is Director of Film at the British Council, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about this year's new programme. Briony.
Hi everybody, I'm Briony. Very nice to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We've got a really nice 45 minutes or so to go, I think, an opportunity to kind of dig deep into how one of the films from last year's programme got realised, and we've got all the key participants joining us, and I'll introduce them all in 1 second. Before we do that, I'll just allow me just 2 minutes to just explain kind of why we're here, or how we got here in the first place. So my job is, I'm Director of Film for the British Council. British Council is, well, I guess it's Britain's cultural relations organisation, which is a very fancy way of saying that we are charged to build trust and create relationships between people in the UK and people everywhere else. And we do it in lots of different ways, including teaching English, including doing a number of education projects. And we have a very, very big arts programme, and I run the film bit of the arts programme. And I always think that in a way I've got the easy job in relation to cultural relations if it's about kind of provoking conversations, because film is like a kind of, you can use film as a kind of Trojan horse. Everybody interacts with film with moving image, even if they think they don't do art or they don't do education. But everybody has a view on film, because film is entertaining and it can educate and it can inform and it can challenge and it can provoke. It can do all of those things just when you watch a movie. We use film in lots of different ways to kind of create conversations, create relationships. I've got a very nice job, let's be honest. About 6 years ago, we don't create our own projects. We always create projects in partnership with key organisations, either in the UK or elsewhere. relationship with the BFI for a very long time, and specifically with the BFI festivals teams. We've been working a lot with BFI. We had been working a lot with BFI Flair, and one of my colleagues in I can't actually remember which country it was, but in another country, asked to showcase some of the films that were being presented at the BFI Flair Festival, which is the UK's LGBTIQ+ film festival. We had a long conversation about whether we should be sending films across, doing whatever we want. And suddenly the idea of putting some of the films from Flair online came up. This was 6 or so years ago, so it's not what we were doing, kind of on a day-to-day basis like we are now. We ended up saying, well, if we were putting films online for this particular country, we could just unlock them for everywhere. And then we realized that we had the potential for a really interesting project, because obviously films from Flair have an LGBTIQ+ message. The whole world doesn't embrace that message. And so we realized that actually we could do something possibly quite political in showcasing queer films on an international platform. So this project became known as 5 Films for Freedom. We simply took 5 short films from Flair and we made them available to the whole world. And then the network of British Council colleagues in over 100 countries shared those films with partners, with audiences in their countries. The project's been incredibly successful. I think it's live for the whole period that Flair is live in London each year. So in 6 years, that means the project has been live for 66 days, 11 days in every one of those years. And in that time, just over 14 million people have watched one of the films, one of those short films, and they've been watching them in 202 countries, 202 countries and principalities, which means that they've been watched in 72 countries, all 72 countries where homosexuality is criminalized, and all 8 countries where the death penalty is in place for homosexual activity. So that's quite significant that we were able to put LGBTQ plus ideas, stories, people on a platform where sometimes that was a very risky, these are risky discussions to have. This is risky material to see. And so we realized that there was a real thirst for that material. However, we were very keen that the program is an international program. We don't just pick UK shorts, even though Flair is a UK festival, but we went into the international program of Flair, picked the shorts from across the globe. And what we found was that we were really lacking in films, available films from the Middle East and the African continent. Not surprisingly, possibly, given the conditions in both of those countries. So we got together with our partners at BFI Network, with Jess and her colleagues, and decided that we might do something to kind of be active about provoking work from both of those 2 regions. And the result was More Films for Freedom, the program that we're about to talk about. Simply, it was a commissioning program, a very small scale commissioning program. We had very small budgets. We were able to offer 3 commissions. And the idea, going back to we're trying to provoke conversations between the UK and the rest of the world, was that we invited teams from the UK and either the African continent or the Middle East to pull together ideas and then make films collaboratively. We commissioned 3 short films, UK collaborations with a Syrian filmmaker who is now living in Lebanon, with a Palestinian filmmaker, and with a team. And the films are incredibly different. There's a drama, there's an experimental drama, there's a documentary. They all have really different tones, really different, they're exploring very different subjects. But it's very strange because they all have this through line. There's a theme that kind of runs through them. So actually they work really beautifully as a program that you watch in all together. The idea was that the program was going to be, the films were going to be premiered at Flair in March this year. But as those of you will know, Flair was one of the earliest casualties of lockdown. It was a festival that was due to happen at the end of March, and it was cancelled with 2 days to go. So our wonderful More films did not get their premiere. So instead, we wanted to pivot the films to online, make them available and share them with the world. And we suddenly realized that with Pride not happening in most of the world, Pride obviously runs sort of June through to September, wherever you are in the world. And we realized that we had 3 amazing films that we could gift to people online in place of Pride celebrations. So that's exactly where we are at the moment. We've already showcased the first film, the Palestinian collaboration called Nowhere, that was online for the first month in June. We're right in the middle now, showcasing the Men Who Speak Gayle. And on the 16th, I think, of August, we'll be flipping over, and the final film, Let My Body Speak, will be online for the final month. So let's talk about Gayle. The second of the 3 films, beautiful, touching short, about a meeting between a young mixed race drag artist who hails from Cape Town's Cape Flats, and a white queer man who's 2 generations his senior. Now, hopefully you have all watched the film, because otherwise we're going to really spoil it for you. It's online. It's been online for about 2 weeks now, and hopefully you've all had the chance to see it. And I think Jessica will be able to put the link again in the chat, should you want to share it with friends. We'd love it if you did. So let's meet our wonderful Gayle team. First of all, I think you should be able to see them all on your screens. Thembisa Cochrane, give us a wave, there we are, who together with Georgie Paget, they are the UK-based producers working out of Caspian Films, UK production company. But Thembisa is South African and I understand works between the UK and South Africa. Hear more about that. Welcome, ladies. Thank you very much for joining us, and congratulations again on the film. On the top left of my screen, we have Andrew Brukman, who is the amazing director, experienced documentary director, who has shepherded this film to life. And then bang in the middle of my screen, exactly where she should be, we've got the amazing Miss Nikki Kay, who is the star performer, who is the reason for this film, the amazing performance that was recorded and captured by these filmmakers. So if you all want to unmute yourselves, then we can hear from you. I'm not sure quite who wants to kick off, but I mean, obviously we'll start at the beginning and hear about where the story came from. And I'm assuming that you were well underway with this story when you spotted the call for more films and the potential to kind of turn this into a short film. Who wants to kick off? Who started this project?
It should be Andrew.
Yeah.
Andrew. Go for it.
Appropriate. Yeah, about 4 years ago, a friend of mine heard someone, she was a colleague of hers in Cape Town, speaking Gayle. She didn't know what it was, and asked him, and he mentioned it very briefly, and she came to me and said, you know, I've just heard about this, and yeah, I was obviously making films at the time, and it really fascinated me. And that was just the beginning point. And then we I think we Googled you, Miss Nikki, and Googled Gayle, and I think, no offense, but I think it was the 3rd page of Google. You came up, and you were doing self-broadcasting on Facebook. I think being Nathan Kennedy or other sort of comedy persona, and all in Gayle. So we watched this, and I mean, just completely fell in love with it, and were just in stitches for a very, very, very long time. And then we were in contact. I remember we met the first time, and we filmed a little bit over the course of a few months, and then eventually found out about Louis, who's the other main character. And actually, in fact, I had also decided then to move over to the UK for a bit and pursue a film career there also. And the week before I left, actually, went up to meet Louis and filmed. And I really kind of wanted to get this in the can. So I knew I probably wouldn't be back for a while. And then I edited it and put it together in a sort of teaser and was using that to kind of pitch out to people. And yeah, at the time, the story was quite different. So I think that's one thing to bear in mind, is that the story is always changing. In fact, the teaser, which we pitched to the BFI, was about a much bigger story. But I think the main thing was, and again, for sort of potential filmmakers, is that two of the things was the sort of access could be shown, and then also character sketches. I think that's probably what really sold it for the BFI. And yeah, so from there, and then this opportunity, saw it on Facebook, and that's kind of, yeah, when we applied.
Miss Nikki, did you have any reservations about sort of turning over your, this quite, this sort of important moment for you, turning it over to a filmmaker that you didn't know, a team that you weren't familiar with? Did you have any reservations about that?
A bit at the beginning, yes. I was spoken to that by a couple of publishers before that in writing a book, and I was like, not ready. But eventually I sat down, I thought about it, and I said, this is a part of my history also that people need to know.
Yeah, very good. How did you then all get connected? How did you get connected with Caspian Films and with Thembisa and Georgie?
So, yeah, I mean, it was a friend of mine who's a really great South African producer, basically, who introduced Andrew and myself, which was, really nice. And so Andrew, right from the beginning, the first time we met, was already talking about this project and this project that he was developing. And the thing is, Caspian Films at the moment was kind of, Georgie and I set it up with this aim of making fictional work. So we hadn't really thought of ourselves as documentary, although Georgie has a great track record in documentary. I do not. So this was, I hadn't really thought that we would want to produce a doc, but I think Andrew is just very persuasive when he wants to be.
Definitely.
And of course, it's a super exciting, and of course, we saw, to be honest, Georgie and I fell in love with it because of that trailer, the teaser that Andrew had shot, and we met Miss Nikki digitally on that, and just thought, that looks amazing. These people look amazing as well, and we just it was a great story.
Yeah, I think for us it was definitely that teaser, that trailer that Andrew had spent all that time putting together, and all of that work. Just, I remember actually so clearly the two of us sitting there, Thembisa saying, "I've got to show you this thing," and we just sat there kind of enraptured, going, this is not even a question. We need to do this. It's not what we were looking to do, as Thembisa said, but sometimes just projects just catch you like that. And it just, really, obviously there was separately Louis and Miss Nikki had been filmed, and we just fell in love with these humans, and just there was something so joyful and uplifting and interesting, and as Miss Nikki says, an element of actually history as well, but also something very current. It just ticked all the boxes. It was just, you couldn't say no. We couldn't say no.
Somebody's just asked if there is any way of seeing that trailer, not necessarily now, but the teaser. And I wonder, is it something that you have shared or would be prepared to share?
I must say that I think that the short is better. Even better.
We would hope so.
I wouldn't want to over big up that teaser, but it was just, I think, just in terms of, to your point, I think, meeting characters when you're deciding, actually, is this going to be, is this going to make an interesting short film? I just think that minute or two just answered our question of, yes, it's interesting, it's important, we're laughing, we might even cry, it's taking us everywhere.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the way the sort of development happened between you all? Kind of like, what was the sort of logistics of the relationships? Because some of you were here, some of you were in South Africa. How did you kind of move the project through the various stages?
Well, it's a lot of digital communication, as we're all used to. Emails and Skypes and WhatsApp and just that kind of communication. And then, and just working through the script. Andrew, do you want to talk about that process?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things is, and this is obviously the point of the nature of the collaboration, is that, we're dealing in South Africa, and so, I'm from there, and, in this case, Thembisa also happens to be from there, but that isn't necessarily has to be the case, but obviously, you know, it's a collaboration. So, you know, there was an understanding that I knew South Africa and I knew what I was talking about and how, you know, logistically in one sense, but also just in the scripting, you know, and having Thembisa was an absolute bonus in terms of the script development. And I think, you know, you start off from a point of realizing there's creative constraints, and then kind of working with those. So yeah, we obviously couldn't do, in fact, actually what the teasers, and that's why I'll definitely send the original teaser to anyone who wants to, because I think it's very, very interesting to see what I was pitching to you guys, in fact, which I knew from the beginning wasn't a sort of realistic in terms of budget, but just to kind of say that that's not the be all and end all. I think, like, as I was saying, you know, it's the characters and just the story in general that sold it. So that's fine. And then, yeah, and then the script kind of developed, like I say, kind of going, okay, well, how can we show these two characters? How can we explain Gayle, but also how can we make this just a enjoyable film? Because obviously we're dealing with the subject matter of Gayle, you know, which as Miss Nikki describes it as a language of love and laughter. And so I also came from a kind of photojournalistic, journalistic background. And so my style of documentary filmmaking is quite sort of traditional in a sense. And yeah, there was, you know, I remember thoughts in the beginning, there could have been a sort of a bit more of an abstract documentary feel. You know, we could have maybe just had, I don't know, on a green screen, various different people talking about it and, you know, cutting between this and that. But I realized that we have someone who is in the middle of nowhere, and that's very far. And it just kind of set it up already for a kind of journey type film and this meeting. And so that's kind of where the style of the film and the script came from, was this really kind of inner week feel. In fact, you know, all the stuff that we filmed previously in the 2 years before, we basically used, I think, 30 seconds of all of that footage, because we really had to we wanted to stick to this, taking you along completely on this journey in a almost chronological way. And so that kind of, with that structure, I kind of went, okay, great, well, we've got the structure, now let's work within that. You know, we knew we were going to go up there, and I think it worked well, especially in the budget for that kind of story. Yeah, and that's where the script developed from.
And Miss Nikki, did you, you know, as Andrew was kind of figuring out how to tell this story, did you have your own idea about how he should show you, how, you know, the kind of the way that he should unfold this narrative, or were you comfortable in just kind of letting him dictate it?
I think, like Thembisa said, Andrew has a lot of persuasion. And because for me, there was a time where I thought, okay, it's not going to happen, because it took us quite some time to get to the actual production side of things. And yeah, he was just like, just be you. Just do what you do on your daily, because I also have a page called Being Nathan Kennedy. So there I did some tutorials with the girl, because after meeting Andrew and meeting Frances, I then found out about her brand of t-shirts that she has, I Speak Gayle, and that has the Gayle words on it and little definitions on the tags. And I was like, oh wow, I didn't realize people are still speaking it, because it was kind of dying out in Cape Town. And that just waved everything up and let's run with it.
And also, I think, Miss Nikki, you know, part of this is your drag career also, you know, and you're one of the only drag artists that I know in South Africa that actually sing. So a lot of this was to, you know, to give you a platform also through all of this. And yeah, I mean, I think talk more about drag in South Africa and your career there, because it's definitely more unique than in anywhere else in the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And okay.
And what about Louis? what kind of, I mean, how much did you just sort of present what you were going to do to him and just, you know, has a fait accompli, or how much kind of collaboration was there in the sort of setup with him?
Well, that was a huge question, wasn't it? It was one of our huge things that we actually had Lauren Dunn, who was the exec on this project, was really, you know, a wonderful collaborator as well, right from the start. She kind of came in on the script, and it was one of the discussions we had really early as a team was like, do we tell Louis? Like, to what degree do we tell Louis that Nathan's, you know, coming to visit? And, you know, it was a really tough one. So for a long time we didn't, but then Andrew, you can talk about how it ended up.
Yeah, so do we tell Louis, do we ruin this moment that we want to film? Real, genuine moment of, so for anyone who doesn't know, this moment was Nathan meeting Louis for the first time, but also asking him to be in the show that Nathan was putting on. Now that's extremely high risk because half of the film relied on Louis being in the show and Nathan's show. And it really, there wouldn't have been any other ending really if Louis said no. And so we debated whether to ask Louis before, but that would ruin everything and it would just be disingenuous. And so we didn't. I do remember having a conversation with him though, where, I mean, you know, as a sort of, you know, the anxiety of how this is going to turn out, I had to really kind of suppress that. I remember speaking to Louis and very
what did Louis think you were making? What did Louis think you were doing?
Yes, no, Louis knew that we were making a film, and he knew that because I'd met him before and talked about Gayle and everything, and he knew that someone was coming up from Cape Town to meet him to talk about Gayle, and that was basically it. You know, I mean, we obviously had to get his permission or check if he wanted to be part of it. But I remember speaking to him on the phone, and very hard to get hold of, but eventually, and saying, oh, you know, talking a little bit about it. And, you know, I said, I think, you know, this guy, Nathan's coming up, and he, you know, he's going to put on a show, I think in the theater, and who knows, maybe you'll perform, Louis. And he, you know, just to kind of test the water. And I remember him saying, oh yeah, no, yeah, maybe we'll see, you know, but not sort of saying anything, but kind of testing the water. And so, yeah, we got to a point where Miss Nikki met Louis for the first time, and it was great. And I think Miss Nikki, to your credit, you know, this, and I think also interesting for directors out there, part of this, I suppose, strategy and technique of filming this was quite a facilitative process. So, you know, Miss Nikki is in a sense, the presenter of this. And that's one way which I wanted to approach it, and leading us through the story. So, you know, again, to your credit, kind of really taking the lead. You know, we didn't sit them down and say, look, you know, here's a Q&A session, this is what you're going to talk about or anything. Miss Nikki is just an absolute natural. And again, also, which I think came across, is that because of this link with Gayle, I mean, that's exactly what it was about. It's about two people meeting and seeing how they got along, you know, and they got on absolutely fabulously, I think.
And I have to say, Miss Nikki is also very persuasive. So, you know, Louis was basically charmed and was like, okay, I'll do it if you're, you know, and I think being there and the process, like that was one of the beautiful things that Andrew was able to capture. That was just that sort of the fact that also, you know, Miss Nikki was super supportive of Louis, and that kind of, you know, I think Louis wouldn't have done it if he hadn't felt safe in that way, which is really cool.
Yeah, it was sort of quite weird, you know, a sort of paternal figure, kind of the roles kind of reversed, you know, and I think in the change room when he arrives, he's a bit nervous, and, you know, Miss Nikki's done this all before, you know, and she's like, just relax, girl, you know, and he's sort of really worked up and everything. It was quite a nice kind of, yeah, role reversal.
Thembisa, you mentioned Lauren Dunn before, who was the exec on the project. Can you just talk a little bit about how that, you know, for the benefit of filmmakers listening, kind of how that relationship works between you as a kind of team who know what you're trying to achieve, and the story that you're trying to tell, and then a kind of an executive who has a, possibly slightly different agenda. Can you just talk about that relationship?
Actually, I feel like Lauren was in a way our champion and our advocate. So I think it's a very positive relationship also for, filmmakers going into this. It's somebody that you have who's not just a, like an institution with lots of pieces in it. And Lauren was the person who could help us navigate and help us when we face challenges, figure out how to solve them, basically. She was a great ally in that way. And also, so not only like an ally to kind of help us pathfind our way through, for example, questions around insurance, or, like how do we deal with it? And there's some questions that we sort of needed to frame what we wanted and then relay that to the funding bodies. And that conversation, Lauren was a brilliant cog in that conversation. But then also, creatively, it was just brilliant to have somebody who's just that one little extra step away from the project. So she knew it, and she obviously knew what we wanted, and she knew from the very beginning. So the first thing we did with her was sit down and have a script conference. So we had coffee, and we went through the whole thought about like what we were thinking, and she picked out some really brilliant creative things. And then because she knew it, she was able to give us feedback in the edit as well. But it was, somebody, obviously Georgie and I, knew it as well. We're like Andrew's right up there, really close, but Nikki K is actually in it. And Georgie and I are like one step away. And then Lauren's just that extra step to be able to say, oh guys, I didn't understand this, or like this doesn't work, or that's the minute that sort of jars with me. And that's extremely helpful to have that extra pair of eyes. So it was a very great relationship. Yeah.
Did you find there was any, I think I often ask this question, like how much conflict was there? Like, I can just imagine, I can imagine, you're all sounding very kind of like it was all a really, really happy occasion, but presumably, like everybody has this sort of, driving creative sense of what they want to achieve in the end. But kind of how did you balance the kind of desires of all of you to create the narrative in a particular way?
Yeah, I think probably as you just described now, Thembisa, probably the first person to start with this is Miss Nikki K. So, we're telling the story of Gayle, but also of Miss Nikki K. So I suppose, Miss Nikki, did you find that there were times where, because you co-authored this, did you find there were times where you wanted to, tell a different story, push a different angle, or how did you feel about how the whole script, let's say, went down?
With the script, a lot of it kind of pushed me beyond my point. I wasn't ready. I wouldn't say I wasn't ready, but mentally I still had to prepare myself. I completely loved the way things went. I didn't know about all the exciting business on the road, shooting, meeting different people and asking the questions. So that was out of the box for me. That was something I wasn't expecting to do. But other than that, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I mean, looking at the final product, what I've seen last week, I was just in awe that I was just like, really, this was a journey. It was a process, and it made me see a lot of other things. Besides the Gayle factor of it, it opened a new horizon to what Gayle is, what being a gay man is like, what being a drag queen is like, and that there is that much acceptance out there.
Can you just talk a little bit about the sort of international collaboration, which was kind of a very big factor in the commissioning of this project? Georgie, I know particularly you've got quite a lot of experience of working, as a UK-based producer with storytellers from international storytellers. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of pros and cons of that, the kind of key difficulties, the key or the real benefits to doing that? Like, why do you keep taking those projects on?
It's a great question, because I think pretty much every time, maybe not every time, but so often they are those projects that just kind of jump out at you, like, without wanting to harp on about how we took on this project we weren't expecting to do. I think the thing for me about international projects in particular is just stories that I know I'm never going to find. on my own, if that makes sense. Stories that I think are really worth telling, really fun to tell, but I know I don't even know they exist. And that's where someone like Andrew comes in, who, who was in South Africa, found that story, understood that it was, it was going to be a great story to tell, even if he didn't know what form it might take in the eventual short. And I think sometimes it is a little bit of serendipity, as Thembisa was saying. It was a friend of hers who connected us. So I think perhaps part of it is having people be aware that, Thembisa and I might be people that wanted to tell this story. But I think it's, for me, the great plus is getting to help in whatever way, help tell those stories, which I sometimes sort of think of myself as audience member number one, in that slightly self-interestedly, they are stories that I want to watch. I want to understand the situation, the story, the people involved, and I have a strong hunch that I'm perhaps not alone in that. And so it's great to hear, that so many people have been watching and been really enjoying the Men Who Speak Gayle. I mean, in terms of trying to think of any cons. I mean, there are the logistical things of, even just wiring money to a different country, insurance, kind of a few logistical things. I think having great partners in the country in which you are filming in particular makes a big difference. Thembisa actually was in South Africa for the shoot, which I think was great. But I mean, Andrew, himself was also entirely, we very much trusted him to do what he did. And I think it was interesting actually just now, as Ms. Nikki was talking about how Andrew sort of pushed her to do things that she wouldn't normally do. I think part of what's great about a collaboration with a filmmaker internationally is and someone who really understands the subject of what they're trying to do, I think, is knowing when to push in a way that I would never know. Miss Nikki and I have never met in person. I wouldn't know what would be within her comfort zone or just slightly outside, but something that she would actually really enjoy doing. And that's where, it's wonderful to have these collaborations. So yeah, I mean, a really exciting process. And I'm trying to think of cons and I can't. Guys, help me out.
I don't need to be any. Well, that's good. That's job done.
Yeah, it's just financial, logistical, and communication, obviously. But I think in this case, we were lucky. Obviously, this team is like, it sounds, it's like there's a lack of conflict stories, because really, it was a really great process.
Sorry.
Like, it has been really, it was really great. But obviously, normally the problems that raise their head internationally is different cultural assumptions or ways that people work differently in different countries. And that could be anything from like rates to working hours to kind of to just how you behave around each other. So those are the things that if you're an outsider, you kind of have to be aware of. But I guess, South Africa is also very used to, as a country, having international filmmakers there. And the other thing about having Georgie or somebody, and Georgie and Lauren, like very, very British people involved in this project, is that they can help us communicate, because I'm sort of half, like, I live in the UK and I'm running this company in the UK, but obviously I understand the world from a South African Cape Townian perspective. So there are things to me that are really obvious, but to Lauren and Georgie, they would be like, what?
What's that? Why that? Yeah.
And so that's where, and it's super helpful, because again, like, if we can please audience member number one, then it works, then it can be international. So if you can collaborate internationally and create it internationally, then it's also much more likely to work for an international audience. So that's...
It's interesting. We were doing quite a lot of thinking in the space between round one, which obviously is your film, and round two, the round that's up for applications at the moment, because obviously the world has changed quite significantly since you made your film. And there are two really significant factors. One, of course, is the pandemic we're all in the middle of, that's kind of stopped travel in its tracks, but also the larger conversation about sustainability and should we be really encouraging people to kind of flit from country X to country Y. So it's interesting to hear to what extent you didn't need to actually travel, that you could do this collaboration digitally. And, hopefully it sounds like that there was sort of minimal travel in a way. and you still got, you know, the result you're looking for.
Definitely, it's super minimal travel. Although I think, you know, all we did at the end, like, is from a travel point of view, is that I did fly down to South Africa, and there is some, like, that, you know, that was, you know, one thing, but there is some real value in physically being present and connecting it in a way. Otherwise, it does become quite disconnected. But in terms of prep and in terms of post, it's completely feasible to work internationally. I think maybe the shoot is just a bit of a challenging point, but in terms of encouraging international collaboration, you know, sustainability, we obviously have to be super careful about it, but there is huge value in other perspectives, and to work internationally as teams from different countries is something that's worth making it happen, like, even if it happens at great cost, or in a way that we have to work around obstacles, like, you know, not wanting to take too many flights or something. But the sort of, that is important, I think.
We're going to go to some questions in the chat in a minute, which are actually specifically sort of generally questions about the application process. So we'll come to those after this. But before we do, and if you do have questions specifically for this team, then please pop them in the chat, in the Q&A box rather. But just before we go to those, can I just ask you about the audience expectation you had around this film? So, you know, what conversations did you have about potential audiences? And, you know, to what extent did you think, oh, we're going to be preaching to the LGBTIQ plus minded community? Or to what extent did you want to go beyond that? Did you have a conversation around that?
Yeah, so, yeah, obviously audience is always the one of the things you think about. And yeah, of course, there's an LGBTIQ plus audience. And that was always going to be something. It's a South African story. Obviously, it's a collaboration, so you always have to consider, you know, who's actually interested in a South African story. But what I found with this, and it was part again of the kind of way in making the film, was the story and the narrative is quite a sort of standard narrative. You know, it's this journey and ends in a show and everything, and that I found is something that people have always commented on, and they've said, oh, it is just so great to see Nathan get there and this happen. And, you know, it kind of, it wrapped people up in a familiar narrative where, you know, Trojan horse you used as a term earlier, where they could then get kind of fed these different ideas that they wouldn't have maybe necessarily been interested in the first place. So I think that one thing is interesting to see how, as a filmmaker, you can use narrative structure to make it more appealing to people. Yeah, and I think also it's just kind of the mystery factor also is for anyone. You know, you don't have to be gay or straight to just be involved in mystery. And again, that was something built into the narrative structure of this. You know, you see these high heels on a long road, and you just want to know where they're going, you know, and what's going to happen. So regardless of the themes, I think they're quite easy to kind of see who and who isn't interested in them. It's more the narrative structure that I think is interesting to look at.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Nikki, have you taken this film back and shown it to the people in Prince Albert?
I would love to. We discussed it with them for the theatre. So it would be actually a nice one to go back and just sit and everybody enjoy it.
I think it's just COVID.
Yeah. Yes, well, of course, it was finished right at the moment.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I suppose that'd be quite meta, because a lot of the people in Prince Albert were in the film, you know. They were there, you know, and we walked around talking to them in the town, you know, and there's not many people there, you know. So, yeah, but what we did actually, and unfortunately it didn't make the film, and this is so amazing and part of it, exactly what we're doing. And in fact, what the kind of feature, which we just had some really exciting announcement about, but the feature is that when we're in Prince Albert, we got told that there was a group of queer drag friends in the what we term the township, so the sort of ghetto part, if you want, of Prince Albert, and so we went and met, and we actually filmed with them, but we just didn't have enough time to put it in. But I mean, this is exactly what we were doing, is, you know, queering the space. And by Miss Nikki arriving in town, people kind of almost like magnetizing to her that wouldn't have anyone else that they are familiar with to sort of, you know, attract to. And that's, again, with the feature, that's kind of one of the things we want to look at. But I mean, that was an amazing experience to really kind of get in a town that's very separated in kind of, you know, a wealthier area and a poorer area, to actually kind of connect them. And, you know, the after party we had was at this bush bar with, you know, all these farmers go there. And I mean, you know, by the end of that, there was myself and Miss Nikki on the bar with all the drag queens from the township, farmers sitting there, Louis there. I mean, it was I can't even describe it, you know, doing
Basically
sort of
at our own pride.
yeah.
That's another film right there.
Teaching everyone in the bar Tina Turner, you know, sort of dancing. That for me was kind of almost one of the biggest rewards, was creating this evening for everyone afterwards. And everyone that was in the documentary was there, not just who was involved in making the documentary, but everyone who's in it was there. That's the kind of relationships we fostered during the process of making the film, which for me is always so important also. And on that again is, you know, Miss Nikki K in the process, and maybe talk a little bit about how making this, you know, this song and track that we've recorded, maybe talk a little bit about that, Miss Nikki K.
Yeah, and we basically were struggling with copyrights to a song for the short film.
And then so I mean, yeah, well, I'll fill in the important part. Which a week before, we kind of said, well, guys, we don't have rights to any songs. We tried I mean, we really kind of pulled out all the stops, and we're on about plan P or N in a minute. Sure. And so we, you know, I think I suggest, I've got a cousin who has a sound studio in Cape Town. Why don't we get him to write a generic sort of disco track similar to the songs that Miss Nikki sings, and then she's going to write a song. Hadn't told her that yet. We all agreed, brilliant plan, well, only plan. And yeah, 3 days before I was flying, I told Miss Nikki, and I don't know what you thought, but that was the only option. And then when I arrived, we drove straight up to location, which is about 5 hours. And I remember in the car saying to Nathan, so how's the song going? And I remember you just said, no, I've had some thoughts. And then literally, this is now 2 days before you performing the song. I remember I said, okay, tomorrow morning, getting up early, I'm getting you a coffee, and there we are sitting on this porch in the most desolate desert town in the middle of nowhere.
Red sand.
And I said, okay, let's write it. And you'd actually stayed up late and said, no, I've actually written a bit. So I thought, okay, I played literally on my phone, played the bass soundtrack, and I was just blown away by these lyrics and song and melody that you had written. And so, yeah, I mean, that now from that, we've just gone back in the studio and recorded a proper version with actually an added verse that we're now cutting into a music video, and that's going to be released as a song on Spotify. And we're going to put that out to the radios in South Africa and in fact Gayle in the UK. And that's going to be a kind of supplementary part of the film, which is amazing. I just think that in terms of documentary filmmaking and being able to make things happen for the people in the film is really what your goal should be, you know?
Yeah, and just to add, like on any filmmaking, it's just turning what you think. That was for us our biggest obstacle, was getting the rights to one of the tracks that Miss Nikki sings anyway in that show, and to turn the biggest obstacle into what's almost become the thing that we're like most proud of is quite like a nice thing. So don't freak out, filmmakers, if you're facing that.
Yeah, definitely an unexpected silver lining to that problem. Yeah,
we've got a couple of questions specifically for you. One is how long, from Natasha Hawthornthwaite, who says, how long did you spend filming and editing?
Sorry, how long did we spend filming?
How long did you spend filming and editing?
And editing. Yeah, so besides the sort of teaser part filming, that was about in between about a month or two of filming, which we didn't even end up using. But then the sort of principal shooting, if you want to call it, was 5 days of quite a very intense schedule. And we were lucky because we wanted it to be this kind of chronological journey. So it kind of worked out well to be able to do that. And we could actually plan quite well, which is surprising for a documentary, with all of that. So, you know, we could fit it in. And then the editing, that was the better part of 2 months. I think that very, very intense. I mean, I remember I handed in the first edit at 3 p.m. on Christmas Day.
Oh yes,
Yeah. Remember that.
What else would you have been doing?
He's still working.
I was actually I stayed in South Africa because my family's there. So, you know, it was very, very intense.
Amazing. Okay, this has been absolutely brilliant to listen to you, and I wonder if I can get you to stay here for a moment while I invite Jessica to come back and join us, because we can take some questions specifically about the application process, and I'm sure that you guys will be able to jump in with some of these. Jess, did you want to say anything more about the next round before we take some of these questions?
I thought what I might do is just give a bit of an overview of how people can apply. I've been dropping some links into the chat box, which is basically like links to the guidelines, links to the application form. There's also a designated email address. So if people want to drop us, if they have any questions that they can't find the answer to in the guidelines doc, just drop us a line there. It's morefilms4freedom@bfi.org.uk. It's all available on the network website as well at the minute, if you want to check that out. The deadline for applications is the 16th of August, as you know, rapidly approaching. And it's the final delivery of all the films is going to be the 15th of February 2021. So people need to be pretty sure that they can commit to that timeline.
And the deadline is a slightly unmovable, because the idea is that you premiere at Flair,
yes,
which we hope will be a real life festival next year.
It better be, hadn't it? Gosh, it was so upsetting. It was so up against the wire when it was postponed. Well, as an in-person event. And then, of course, it's £20,000 per project that people can apply to. You can apply for more. I mean, you can have bigger budgets than that. You can't apply for more. It's £20,000. That's it.
Which we should note is quite a significant increase on the budgets that these guys had to work with. Amazingly, BFI Network were able to find some more money this year. Now you've done all the hard work. You know, everybody else gets more money. So yeah, it's up to 20,000 this year.
Up to 20K. You can bring more, but you need to have that money confirmed, I think, by the 15th of September 2020. So we need evidence that that money's in place. And the films are 5 to 10 minutes max. There's a budget template online that you can find that will help you fill out all the budget lines. Do please, as far as you can, factor in the costs of shooting in this new COVID world. And the ideas have to be original. So they can't be adaptations of, say, short stories or novels unless you hold the rights to them, unless they're your original work that you're adapting. So say it's a play or a radio drama that you've written yourself that you're adapting for the screen. In that case, that's fine. But if it's somebody else's work that you'd be adapting, unfortunately, we can't accept those. I think those are the big key line things.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jess. Shall we just quickly nip through these questions, because I know we're running very close to time. The first one is something that these guys may be able to help with as well. If our short film is in a different language, this is Catalina Croitoro asking this question. If our short is in a different language, should we submit a script in English when applying, or in both languages? And I'll say, yes, you should submit it in English. It was an interesting one because, of course, Gayle is a film that's in English, but also has Gayle. So I can't remember what you did in your treatment.
In the treatment, it was just English.
It was just English, yeah.
I think we had, because it's also Afrikaans also mixed with it. So
Yeah.
I think we had one or two of it was basically just giving examples of what Gayle looks like in a sentence. I think there's probably 3 sentences, and then I just put in square brackets the English translation. So it wasn't
okay. But we need to see the script in English, yeah. And then somebody else has said, is a teaser trailer needed for the application? No, not at all, from our perspective. But obviously, I mean, particularly with a documentary film, when you're trying, as these guys have already said, when you're trying to give the flavour and the tone of your participants and also prove the access, then it was obviously incredibly helpful in your case. So not essential, but if you can, then do. And then somebody says, I joined a little late, apologise if the questions were already answered. Is it possible to reapply with an amended idea from that which was shortlisted previously but not commissioned? And then will there be one EP supervising all projects this year as there was last year? Question 1 is a tricky one. The guidelines actually say it is not possible to reapply if you have already been turned down. We could take that offline and have a conversation about that one. But I think the principle is we don't take resubmissions, sadly. But I'm sure you've got lots of other ideas. And then the question about if there's one EP, there will be, but sadly it won't be Lauren this year. But it will be, I think it's going to be Cara Davison, isn't it, Jess?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
So it'll be Cara working with Jess. But yes, there will be one EP kind of as the sort of through line between all the projects. Oh, here's a tricky one. Okay, you mentioned showcasing these shorts in countries where homosexuality is severely punished. What kind of support do you offer to makers navigating such spaces safely? My work is set in Saudi Arabia, and the wide reach you offer is both amazing and important, but also a bit anxiety-provoking in terms of potential risks to us involved, who will continue living in such countries beyond this project. That's a brilliant question, and actually is sort of why we're doing this. You know, we are very acute why there's a sort of dearth of projects coming through from specific countries, you know, where homosexual lifestyles are illegal, criminalized, you know, under the death penalty. We know that. That's why we wanted to kind of provoke projects from those. We wanted to see stories from those regions because, you know, LGBTQ plus people are everywhere. Interestingly, when we did the first round of 5 Films for Freedom, I was really convinced that, you know, because of an online project, you can tell who's watching where. We can't tell who's watching, but you can tell where people are watching. And I was, of course, thinking, well, of course, in Europe, we'll have huge viewerships. In the UK, in the US, we'll have huge viewerships. But actually, in the top 20 most viewed countries, 3 countries were there who have the death penalty in place. So we suddenly realized, you know, okay, this is really, we're filling a need here. We're fulfilling a need here in sharing these stories. So for us, it's really important to be able to share stories from those countries. So which is why we are doing something that is potentially sounds potentially risky. The answer to your question is there's sort of 2 sides to it. One is that there was a very deliberate thing here where we were able to, in a way, use the cover of a UK partner to help get these stories told, in that we fully expected that there might be participation from people in countries where this work is a challenge, who did not want to be identified publicly, who don't want to have their names, their faces, they don't want to be publicly identified. So that was one thing. There is a possibility of kind of, you know, using your UK partner to shield you. The other is that we British Council have a network in over 100 countries, including all the countries that, you know, where this is the biggest challenge. And what we've invited those countries, our teams in those countries, to do is to help support the filmmakers. Our colleagues in those countries always engage in work that challenges the sort of societal norms, because that's what art does. And it's art's job to provoke and to challenge. So they are very they're very up to speed with, in a way, what is too much of a risk. And so they're there to guide you in that process. And the third thing is that we work very closely with organizations like Doc Society, UK-based doc society, who have an amazing set of resources about working in challenging places, you know, and about kind of mitigating risks and lessening risks in working in particular places. So it's not something that we take remotely lightly. We are absolutely aware that this is a massive challenge that we're kind of putting out there, and that there are places where it will not be possible to publicly take up that challenge, which doesn't mean you can't do it. You know, when we talk to our colleagues in countries about sharing the 5 films generally, we say to them, actually, we give 3 challenges with our colleagues internationally. We say you can either go for this program, you can put it on the homepage of your website, you can really shout about it, you can own it. Or if it's too much of a risk, we give you a set of non-branded materials, you know, just plain materials, and you can push those out through underground networks and partners in country. And of course, in every country, including Saudi Arabia, there are underground networks of queer people, you know, experiencing art and culture and, you know, telling their stories. So there was that. And then we laid out a 3rd challenge to the countries, the team, the British Council colleagues in countries where they really felt this was just too much of a risk for anybody to be associated with. And for us, that challenge was, in that case, please have a conversation with your staff team, who are local, you know, local people. Have a conversation with your local people about why you are engaged, why the British Council is engaged with this project, and why we think it's important to talk about these issues on a kind of big international platform. So it's a really good question. I don't have a complete answer there, but there are a number of different things that you know, we can do to help support people, either by anonymity, can't even say that, or by you know, sharing particular resources, or by using my colleagues in country to kind of help mitigate the risks. But it's something that we would talk about explicitly if you got to the point of interview. We talked about all teams about risk, and there is quite a big risk assessment process that goes on. 3rd question is, do you need to have the international team in place pre-application, or can you put that relationship building into the application? Jess, do you want to just quickly talk about the meet and greet next week?
I do, yes. So I've dropped a link actually into the chat there. You can find it on the website as well. This time next week, we're going to be running an online meet and greet where we're going to be dropping people who are looking for collaborators and international team members into little Zoom breakout rooms where you can talk a little bit about your idea, about your experience, who you're looking for to complete your team, and just get to know each other a little bit. So yeah, it's just a way to facilitate some international collaboration. You can sign up for that. We'll ask you some basic questions about who you are and, you know, what you're looking for in terms of your additional team members and collaborators. So yes, that'll be this time next week on Zoom. So.
And it is sort of beyond that. It is, you know, some of the teams that we met at the application process, at the interview process last year, definitely they were at the very beginning of their relationship, their international relationship. I mean, for us, it's sort of, in a way, it's easier if the impetus comes from the international team. You've got an amazing creative idea. You know, somebody like Nathan has an amazing idea, and we find it easier to kind of almost matchmake you with a UK producer, because obviously Jess and her networks, you know, are very kind of connected with potential people who might be interested. So, you know, we don't need everything kind of signed and sealed at the point of application. I think, is that all the questions that we've got so far, Jess?
It is. Do we have one? No, I think that's all of it. I'm just answering one I'm just typing the answer to one, which is about insurance, but I can answer that quickly, which is, in terms of COVID and insurance, it's still an evolving situation at the minute. There's still talks ongoing with government about underwriting risk, etc. Obviously, with short films, it's slightly less of a risk because the shoots are shorter. But with this program, it's slightly complicated because people might want to shoot overseas, and yeah, and now the COVID spikes happening across Europe now that we're unlocking. So it's a challenging situation. It's one that we're monitoring closely because we're hoping to move some network shorts closer to production over the next couple of months. So we're keeping an eye on it. Basically, the way it works with insurance is they're just not insuring people against cancellations of shoots, shutting down shoots. So that's where the major risk is likely to be incurred. So yeah, we're keeping an eye on it. We're hopeful that we'll have some government information in the next, well, I'd heard by the end of the month, but I'm not sure. We've been hearing that for a while, haven't we, Briony?
Okay, but anyway, there's nothing wrong with a Zoom film, which we'll all be seeing lots of.
We're all pros on Zoom now, aren't we?
Okay, I'm very conscious that we've run over. I'm sorry to kind of keep everybody, but this has been an incredibly lovely experience. I've really enjoyed learning more about the film, meeting you all, and I hope that was useful to people who might want to be, up here this time next year, showcasing their own film. Men Who Speak Gayle has got another 2 weeks to run. Is that right? 2 weeks to run. So please share it and encourage audiences across the world to enjoy it, because it really is a lovely, lovely film. And just one thing, Andrew and Miss Nikki, you have talked about turning this into a feature.
I hope so. Not yet, not that much detail yet.
So we actually just found out, and this is, this is exactly what you guys are here for and have created, I suppose, or caused, is that we just found out this week that we got into the Durban Film Festival, which is South Africa's big film fest finance forum for the feature.
Perfect.
So that's sort of one little step towards this, and that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't because of this. So it's those kind of steps.
Okay. So watch this space. I can't wait. I want some more Gayle. All right. That's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of day. Miss Nikki, really appreciate you beaming in from South Africa. Been really great to meet you. And thank you for getting slammed up for us. Thanks ever so much. And we'll be here this time. Jess and I will be here this time next week, hopefully to be able to facilitate some international conversations. So please come back then. All right. Thanks ever so much, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.